Hey, I'm James from Smokin' Dad BBQ, and you guys have been asking, why don't I show a little bit more love to the Joe Jr.? I'm more than happy to oblige, and so today we're going to do a low and slow beef rib, and I can't wait to try smoking it on the Kamado Joe Jr. I've done plenty on larger Kamado Joes, but I've never done a beef rib on the Kamado Joe Jr. So we're going to figure out how this little guy does together. Now, I've already gone ahead and salt brine this overnight. I'll show you a little clip on a tomahawk where I recently did this, just so you can get a sense for how much salt you want to add. You want to add enough salt as if you were going to season it and then cook it right away. You don't want too little, because that's not going to be enough for these thicker cuts of meat for the salt to go through and tenderize. And you also don't want to cake it on there, because then you can go from undetectable and tender to way too salty. And so now that we've got our salt on, we want to go ahead and add some additional flavors to our beef ribs. So I'm going to start off using a binder. You can use olive oil, you could use duck fat spray, you could use a hot sauce. I'm a big fan of the hot sauce. And so today we're just going to throw down some hot sauce, because that's not something that you're going to taste in the beef rib at all, but it does add a nice smoky depth, a bit of an umami flavor to our meat. Then I'm going to hit it with some garlic powder, some onion powder, and then cover that pretty aggressively with some coarse black pepper. And that's just going to help build our bark for our beef ribs. So those are going to be sitting out for about an hour by the time we get our Kamado Joe Jr. fired up for this indirect low and slow cook. Let me bring you a little bit closer so you can see exactly how I'm setting that up. But before I do, and maybe it doesn't show as well, when I'm talking about a couple pieces of smoking wood, that also really depends on the size of the smoker that you're using. Today, we're going to be using some hickory pieces, and you can see they're only a couple inches in size compared to what I'm normally smoking with. It's a big piece here of peach wood, and this would not be something you'd want to use in a smaller grill like a Kamado Joe Jr. because it's going to take up a lot of your firebox, and this will burn unpredictably. It'll take a long time to get going. Once it ignites properly, you'll get a lot of temperature, and then it'll just be ash and a big vacancy in your charcoal basket, and it'll be hard for the fire to be manageable. So what we're going to do instead is we're going to put a couple of these smaller pieces right on the bottom of our basket, and I'll show you how I do that. And then we're going to add our charcoal on top. Then we'll go ahead and put a drip pan on top of our heat deflector, install our grid, and let this come up to temperature. Okay, so I've pointed out this accessory before if you've seen one of my other videos. The newer Kamado Joes come with a charcoal basket, which is hands down, if I could pick just one aftermarket accessory to have, or if you have a Classic 3 or a Big Joe 3, it comes included, is go find yourself one of these. I'll put a link in the description below. It's made by a company called Kick-Ash Basket, and I think it's a must-have for the Joe Jr. Not only does it allow you to clean your coal out really well, but when you take this guy camping, which I absolutely think you should do, it's the easiest way to help get heat out of your ceramic, because you can remove that heat source, just douse that with water, or sit it on the beach or wherever you are, and just let your ceramics cool down. So now let's go ahead and add our smoking wood. So I have one bigger piece, which I'm going to put sort of in the middle towards the back, and I'm going to put the two smaller ones just off on the side where they're not touching, and I can get good airflow around them. Now let's go ahead and add our charcoal. Okay, so that's about what we want for charcoal. You lose a little bit of charcoal capacity when you're using the basket, but I've recently done a pork shoulder on the Joe Jr. and I still had plenty of charcoal left when it's all said and done, so that's going to be enough. You might have saw I'm using Jealous Devil for charcoal today, and I've been trying that a little bit more in the Joe Jr. because I still find it burns really well, gives lots of BTU, can get hot, but you get a little bit more manageable pieces mixed in the bag that fit the Joe Jr. a little bit better. So that's why I was using that for today. In order to make sure that nothing's going to hit, we'll go ahead and test fit our heat deflector, and what you don't want is to see this deflector sitting up because it's resting on charcoal. That's going to throw your temperatures off skew, as well as just mess up with airflow, take a long time to get a good breathing fire. So if this is hitting, just go ahead and pull out a few pieces until you feel absolutely no resistance setting this in, and you know that it's not going to be resting on top of charcoal. So let's go ahead now, and what we'll do is we'll just slide in our plate and set that aside. And we'll add a fire starter cube and fire it up. So a lot like we do on the Kamado Joe Classic, we're going to do the exact same technique for getting some heat in our dome. I think I want to ride around 250 degrees today, so I'm not going to worry about doing anything till I see 250 to 275 or so on the dome temperature. And we don't have our grid or our heat deflector in yet. What we'll do, after we hit that temperature and we've got some heat in the dome, which is just going to help our Kamado Joe Jr. ride along nice and steady for our low and slow beef rib cook, is we'll go ahead and install the other components, and I'll show you how to adjust the vents on the Joe Jr. using a daisy wheel setup in order to hold that about 250 to 270 degree range is what I want to run today's cook at for our beef ribs. So I'll rejoin you in a minute when our grill is up to temperature. Show you our grill coming up to temperature here, reading about 225, and most of that is actually just coming from our fire starter cube. I just ordered another 4 boxes of these. I've been trying to play around with a couple different fire starter solutions, if you will, and I like these. These have been working pretty good because they burn really hot and they don't tend to extinguish themselves as quick as some of the other ones I've used. So if you're looking for a fire starter cube, I'll go ahead and put a link to these. It's an Amazon affiliate link in the description below. Otherwise, your local barbecue store should have lots of options. But in case you're looking for one, I found these to be pretty good. 270 degrees. And as you can see, we've switched from fire starter being the source of the energy to our coals now lit. So I lit those as close as I could, sort of mid-center, slightly to the front, since the natural tendency tends to be for the airflow to draw to the back. So the back is actually where I'm going to put the thickest part of our beef rib. Let's go ahead and install the rest of our cooking system and adjust the vents. This is about, I think it's an 8 3/4 inch drip tray, and I found it just fits perfectly on our deflector plate. If I can find a link on Amazon, I'll put it there, but my local dollar store has these, so you can find them a lot of places. But if you're looking for the size, I think the packaging said 8 3/4 inch, and that works really well for a Joe Jr. setup. Let's go ahead and get our grid and our beef ribs. Okay, so as you can tell, I'm gonna put the smallest, most narrow part of our beef ribs towards the front of the grill, and I'm gonna put our largest, thickest part of the beef rib towards the back. I'll set up our wireless thermometer to look for an internal temperature. I'm gonna set an alarm for about 160 degrees, just because I wanna see where the bark is, and we'll make a decision based on time, bark, and overall doneness, whether we're going to wrap this or just let it ride, in which case we'll update our temperature closer to about 200 degrees. Let's go ahead and get our beef rib on. Okay, so as you can tell, again, I'm gonna try and position in center where everything is covered and the thickest part towards the back, and I think we're good. Let's go ahead and close this and adjust the vents. All right, so now that we got our beef ribs on, we want to no longer be at maximum airflow mode. The temperature will have dropped. We were getting close to about 270 degrees, and we are now reading under 200 degrees. But don't be alarmed. We've done a couple things. We've added something that's protecting the heat from coming up and hitting the thermometer directly. So we've got our heat deflector in place, plus the ceramic is cool. The grid metal is cool, and we've gone and added our big beef rib, which is cool. So all of that makes it read far lower in the temperature. But if we were just to leave this wide open until we got back to our temperature, we'd have a really hard time, stopping then, because we are actually a much hotter fire, and it's just taken that long to build heat up to the point where our thermometer would be reading that temperature. So we just want to go ahead and trust our setup and our experience here, which is if we are running at about 270 degrees and we adjust everything, it will stabilize at 270 degrees. So I found with the Joe Jr, it responds really well to about 1 finger's width on the bottom draft door instead of the 2 finger that I generally default to with my classic size Kamado Joe. So let's go ahead and adjust the bottom vent to about 1 finger's width. If your finger's different size, that looks to be, I don't know, about 3/4 of an inch. I'll bring you a little bit closer now as we adjust our top vent. First thing I'm gonna do is close it and the daisy wheel's wide open, and I'll move the camera so you can see the settings that I'm gonna. Okay, so let's go ahead and adjust our top vent. And this needs far less air than what you might think to ride steady at about 250 degrees. So there's a little bit of play. So I could be more open here and a little bit less open here. So you just want to try and slide it so it's centered, so you get nice, even airflow out of all of your vents. And so I'm going to look for about just under 1/4 inch on all of our pedestals. So I think that looks pretty good to start. What I'll do is keep checking the temperature, and if we are not getting up a temperature, I'll go ahead and give that just a bit more airflow, or if it's racing pretty quickly towards 270 and it doesn't show any signs of slowing down, we'll go ahead and bump that a little bit tighter. But once we hit that temperature, we should be good to go. And I'm thinking at this temperature, these beef ribs should probably take in the neighborhood of 6 to 7 hours on the grill before we start worrying about any rest. So we're gonna want All right, welcome to about 8 hours in the future. I'll put a screenshot of our meter cook, and as you can see, we held pretty tight between that 250 degrees, 270 degree range that we were looking for. And you can see about 6 moments on the chart, but once every hour or so where I opened up our Kamado Joe Jr. and just added a little bit of spray of water just to make sure that nothing was drying out. Our meter probe sent the alarm when we got close to 200 degrees, and I went ahead and pulled it out. And I've only done that just because it's got a max internal temperature range of just over 200 degrees, and I don't want to risk damaging any components. Plus, I'm not relying on the probe to tell me an exact temperature. I'm looking for a feel, and so for that, we're going to use our Thermapen, and we are going to look for something that feels similar to putting this pen into a jar of peanut butter. So I'll bring you a little bit closer for that so you can see what that looks like. I suspect we're pretty close, if not already there. And if we are, we're gonna go ahead and take off our beef ribs and let them rest for a little bit, just to absorb some of that moisture that the meat has been pushing out. I'm also really curious how much charcoal we used for this cook. So while our beef ribs are resting, I'll go ahead and I'm gonna pull out the heat deflector plate and our grid so we can take a closer look and see how we did on our fuel estimate. I suspect I went ahead and added too much because I, in the past, haven't done many 8-hour plus cooks on the Joe Jr. I relied on it more for hot and fast and a searing station, or things like a spatchcock chicken, where you just never even think about fuel. So I'm actually really curious to see what our basket looks like. Quick little disclosure though, around the 5-hour mark, I noticed I wasn't getting any more smoke or smelling any more of that hickory. So I went ahead and threw in another 2 little pieces, the same size as what we used before, and so they've had another couple hours to get a little bit more smoke on our beef ribs. Enough chit chatter, let's come a little bit closer and I'll show you what our beef ribs look like. All right, so now that our beef ribs have rested about 15 minutes, let's go ahead and slice them up. I'm gonna take everything else inside for the family, but I'm gonna hold one back and we'll do a taste test and find out how our Kamado Joe Jr. did on something like a beef rib. I've only ever cooked larger meats like this on a classic or a Big Joe. I'm dying to find out how the little guy did for something like a beef rib. As you can see, there was plenty of charcoal left, so it was incredibly fuel efficient, and I can't wait to find out how that translates into flavor on our beef rib. I'll bring you a little bit closer so you can see the slicing action up close. We can find out together how it all went. So as you could tell in that little squeeze shot that we had, these beef ribs are just full of flavor. I can't wait any longer to dig in. Let's find out how we did. Going caveman style, just take a bite. Show you real quick what that looks like. Hopefully the camera can zoom in. Let's dig in. Guys, that is amazing. Okay, I need to end the video. I don't even have words. That is incredible. That is so juicy. I don't want to bring it really close. I don't want to gross you out with the bite mark, but you can see what I'm saying. It is so juicy. This is one of the reasons I've said before, I like beef ribs even more than brisket. Not only do they serve as a little bit of a heat shield, so you can cook a little bit hotter, you get away with that 250, 270 degrees, no problem. It insulates it. But you also just get some amazing, amazing beef flavor. And it's just, I find, easier to cook, full of flavor, a little bit less risky or, you know, barrier to entry than a brisket where you're committing, you know, usually over $100 to get a full packer. And now that I know we can cook it on the little guy here, our Joe Jr, and give a result like this, I see a lot more little beef ribs in our future. Anyways, I hope you really enjoyed today's cook. If you did, please go ahead and smash that like button and hit subscribe to catch future videos. Until then, I'm James from Smoking Dead BBQ, signing off.